First on One, a See Here election special.
Hello and welcome to our second See Here general election special. With less than a week to go to polling day, we're continuing our question and answer session with representatives from the three main parties. This week we're focusing on deaf issues. Just what do the three main parties offer deaf people? With me and our studio audience are Nicholas Scott, Minister for Social Security and Disabled People in the Conservative government, Alf Morris, Labour's opposition front bench spokesman for disabled people, who was the first Minister for Disabled People in the Labour government between 1974 and 1979, and Nicol Stephen, the Liberal Democrat Party spokesman. Hello and welcome to See Here. Thank you for coming. Okay. Now we're going to move on to deaf issues, and that means that you can ask them questions and comments about what you want to say. Now, first questioner. There's a lady on the third row with dark hair.
My name is Kavita Kohli, and I would like to ask, what are your policies regarding deaf schools and bilingualism in education?
Now, that's a really important question. So, Nicholas Scott, can you answer that?
Yes, I think bilingualism in education, I believe, has a very great deal to be said for it. Indeed, in a sense, I'd like to take it further than just using bilingualism and the use of the two mediums, as it were, for the education of deaf children. I would like to see in all the mainstream schools the introduction of at least basic signing introduced into the curriculum, so that those in mainstream education will have an ability to communicate with their deaf and hard of hearing contemporaries. And I do believe that that is would be a very big step in the right direction.
Right. I wanted to clarify on that one. Now, Nicholas Scott, are you saying that you fully support bilingualism as part of education?
Yes, as a concept, I think obviously you have to establish, as we move in this direction, the extent to which resources are available, but as a concept, I have no arguments whatsoever with it.
Right, okay, thank you. Now, Nicol Stephen.
Well, I think that really puts the finger exactly on the point. Everyone can easily say that bilingualism is a good thing, but is it going to be resourced? Are we going to show real commitment to the concept? And I fear at the moment that the resources are not there, and we've got to give this whole area a priority. One of the problems as well is it's easy to talk about how good a concept bilingualism is, but to actually implement it, it takes a great deal of effort. A great deal of hard work has to be done in this area. We were hearing in an earlier discussion that we had behind the scenes here how there are books now written in English but with signing at the bottom of them. There still isn't yet a dictionary for British Sign Language. There are vast areas of gaps in our education system where a lot more needs to be done. That will take time, but it will also take resources, and it's an important area where government and local education authorities working together can help to improve the system.
Right, Alf Morris, can you do better than that?
Well, I think it's not just necessary to look at costs. There are costs, but net costs. There are gains in helping people who are deaf to communicate better with other people, with other deaf people. I think we need more deaf teachers. And we have said that that is a very important aim. As the then minister, without any manifesto commitment, I provided the funding for the British Sign Language, not least at the prompting of the late Bill Northwood of the BBC. I did so because I knew, and I was involved in the setting up of the panel of four, organisations. I did so because I knew that this was a priority of people who are deaf. Bilingualism is extremely important. It's insufficiently understood by hearing people. We have to do far more to explain why bilingualism is so important to people who are deaf. Certainly, I believe that we must accept what deaf people want for themselves. And that's why, as I say, as a minister, I'm not talking about the future, I'm talking about the past. That's why I provided funding for a British Sign Language.
Right, okay. Nicholas Scott, do you want to say a bit more about that? You know, you're saying that they've done all these things about bilingualism. What can you say?
I think we have made progress. I pay tribute to Alf because this is not a political issue for the start that he made, and we've built on that, I think, in subsequent years. You may have noticed that recently the first ever signed commercial in television history took place with the launch of the 2 new disability benefits, and we had that properly signed. And we are, in the course of this election campaign, all the party political broadcasts are having subtitling, if not signing, available. So there is...
Sorry, hold on. Can you focus on bilingualism? Because you've really gone off the point there.
Well, it may be, but I think there is a broader issue here, which is making sure that in the wider community there is much greater awareness of the needs of deaf and hard of hearing people, and making sure that messages that are available to the mainstream of the population are also available to those who are deaf and hard of hearing. And I think we need to keep that message going, right, and the growth of that awareness given maximum impetus.
Okay, right.
I don't think there'd be any division between us.
Sorry,
here.
I mean, we're talking about bilingualism at the moment. So, I mean, you've asked your question. That was Kavita, from Kavita. What do you think of his response?
Well, I very strongly feel that BSL should be introduced into schools from a very, very early age.
Are there any other views? Okay, somebody at the front there, in the second row.
I don't know which one of the 3 it was that said something about concentrating on hearing and deaf people together with regards to bilingualism. We're talking about BSL and written English. I mean, you're going all around the houses with your responses. Can you give me a very clear reply, please?
No, I think perhaps you can respond very briefly, each of you. Nicol Stephen?
I'll try to. We believe in bilingualism. We believe that resources should be made available in order to encourage the concept to develop. And I agree with you that in mainstream schools that signing should be part of the curriculum, so that there's an understanding from those with hearing of the problems of deaf and those with hard of hearing. Can I say, I know people with,
right,
with
okay, sorry to interrupt.
One brief point, can I?
Sorry, are you guaranteeing that resources, you know, that if you win the election, that you will guarantee the resources?
I'm not guaranteeing that we'll win the election, but I guarantee if we were to win the election that we would make resources available in that area. One very brief point. I know the father of a deaf child who only when she reached the age of 14 was went on a course for signing. Now that wasn't, in my view, the way that the system should work. I mean, from the very earliest age, that person should have been encouraged to learn BSL, and it didn't happen.
Okay, Nicholas Scott.
In terms of bilingualism, of course, it's not just governments that have to react, although I believe they should. The first book that I came across was my own little 3-year-old who got a book commercially, and it had signing at the bottom of it. Now, if we can encourage that, as well as government action, but people who are publishing commercially to take on board the concept of bilingualism, that will do much more than governments alone can ever do.
Okay, over to you.
I didn't really want to speak always in the language of promises. That's why I talked about having funded the British Sign Language. It's axiomatic, I would have thought. If you are prepared to fund the language, that you believe in its use. I know the priority that is given to this by people who are deaf, and we're saying in our manifesto that we want to march forward with people who are disabled, to understand their priorities, not to be telling them all the time, but to be having regard to their priorities.
Thank you.
And I know.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Now we'll move on to our next questioner. I mean, time's short. So next questioner.
My name is Frances Elton, and I'm from Durham and London. But I would like to ask, now, back in 1988, the European Parliament adopted a recommendation that national governments should give official recognition to the indigenous sign language of their state. British Sign Language is used by more than 50,000 deaf people in the UK, but we're still waiting for official recognition. Why is it that we are still waiting? We're not getting the access that we need. Why must this waiting continue? When will we get this official recognition?
Right. Right. Now, Nicol, how do you respond to that one? That we've been waiting for ages. Now, if you got into power, what would you do?
This is an easy question for me to answer. We would give that recognition, and we would give it immediately. I think there can be no excuse other than a very bad excuse for not having given the sign language the recognition that the EEC says it should have, that deaf people and those with hard of hearing in this country say it should have. The arguments against it, I just think, are totally wrong and excuses rather than sound arguments. In my view, the British Sign Language should have equal treatment. We are a European party. We believe in implementing European directives, and we would do so just as quickly as is possible. So it's a short answer, a simple one, and I hope one that easily satisfies the very deep feeling that clearly exists, understandably exists on this issue.
Right. So now, Nicholas Scott.
Yes, I mean, I think increasingly...
Does this mean that, I mean, all this has happened during your government's reign, so how are you going to improve things when
I
you
think
get
things
into
are
power?
improving, if I may say so, in practice. I know that the journey still has a long way to go, but increasing, I've given you some examples already. You've only got to look at our party conferences, the increasing number of events that I attend that are now properly signed, the signing, as I say, in books that are commercially produced now, the proper coverage in official documents of the needs of deaf and hard of hearing people. I think we are making substantial progress. Exactly how you come to the point where you say legally this is now recognized as an official language and has to be used throughout every document is another argument that we have to address. But I think it would be wrong to assume that we're not making substantial progress down the route of bilingualism and recognition of BSL at the moment.
Right, over to you.
It's a recommendation from the European community. There's nothing mandatory about it. But it strikes me that the present government are not prepared to accept social policies determined in the European community. They don't like the social charter. We do. They were in a minority of 1 of 12 countries in rejecting the social charter. Time was when this country led the way as far as legislating new rights for disabled people was concerned. In the field of access, for example, to building, we were a world leader. I don't like it when we become a world follower, and I do wish we could accept quickly the European recommendation.
Now, so Francis, do you feel satisfied with their answers? What are your comments on them?
Well, I feel that the Tory government are tending to twist things. I mean, when's it going to happen? Tomorrow? Next week? We really need to know how much longer we've got to wait.
Okay, any other comments? Right, I'm Jack Hart, and I very much agree with what Alf Morris is saying about the Conservatives that they opted out of the social charter at the European meetings, but you actually dropped, it wasn't there. Okay, can we have just one more comment from John Hay from Edinburgh? Now, in Scotland, we've got Gaelic, and in Wales, we've got official recognition of Welsh at GCSE level and so on. But even though they can speak English, but deaf people can't speak it well, but they should learn BSL. I mean, there really is a need for the recognition of BSL. I'm sorry, I know that that you're all interested in this controversy. We have to move on. Now, I'm from the BDA. Now, recently, the panel of 4 published a report demanding that we should have the services of communicators for deaf, blind, and hard of hearing people. Now, what does the panel think about this? Do you feel there's a need for deaf people to have a communication service? I mean, what would the party's views be on the provision of such a service? Right, Nicholas Scott, can you reply to that?
I mean, the hacks argument, I think, is one that we are certainly looking at very carefully, and BDA have come to see me to talk about their ideas on both their ideas on human-aids communication, as well as a number of other issues, such as the need to make sure that as many government publications and broadcasts that are intended to communicate with the community as a whole take account of the needs of deaf and hard of hearing people, and we're looking very carefully at those those suggestions that the BDA have put forward. Again, resources come into it, but this is not, in my view, a particularly significant resource question. It is just a question of deciding in consultation with the organisations of deaf and hard of hearing people to see what is the precise formula that we need to adopt to achieve what the BDA are arguing for. I see no arguments about the principle whatsoever.
Right. Alf Morris.
I believe the gains are very considerable. It's about enabling people to become more effective. I think it was a major setback in recent parliamentary exchanges when we heard that the 1986 Disabled Persons Act, Tom Clark's Act, was not to be fully implemented. That sections 1, 2, and 3 were to be dumped. And I know that that has caused great concern in the deaf community, because it was about making absolutely certain that people would be properly represented, would be able to speak for themselves, if necessary, through communicators who could aid them. And I think it really must be generally felt that that really was bad. It took the heart out of a very important piece of private members' legislation. And I hope very much that you will resolve to campaign for the full implementation of that act. I think the answer to the question must definitely be yes.
Right, Nicholas Stephen.
Well, the Liberal Democrats were also frustrated by the failure to implement the 1986 Act, and we believe that it should be fully implemented. In relation to communications, yes, it is important that the needs of the deaf and those with hearing disabilities are more carefully considered. But simply to describe people as the disabled, of course, is to fail to understand the needs of individuals. And I think that part of this process is to treat people far more as individuals, recognize their particular needs, and to allow for those needs, to assess them, and to respond positively to those needs. Far too often, for example, the benefit system recognizes the contributions that you've paid into the system rather than the needs that you have as an individual. I think the same applies in relation to communications. And the Liberal Democrats believe in looking at those needs of the individual far more than simply a whole sector called the hard of hearing or the deaf or the disabled.
Thank you. Now, Murray, were you happy with their responses? Do you want to make any further comments? Yeah, I would like someone to say directly that they would provide the resources to set up, an interpreting service, but none of them said that. You didn't say that clearly. Any other views? Someone right at the very back with a tie in the back row, a gentleman. Now, we deaf people, we're pleased to hear what you're saying, but there are several issues which some of you have forgotten. That it's, the right to communication. Individual deaf, blind, and hard of people have a right to communication, whatever method they use. I mean, that's the important point that needs to be recognized. And you've missed out several important issues about individuals' rights to communication. Don't forget that deaf, blind, and hard of hearing people, children, they have a right to communication. Okay, thank you. Now, I know this is a big area, and perhaps we need more discussion about it, but time's short, so we have to move on. There's a lady in the second row with glasses.
My name's Mira Butcher. I would like to know when it will be recognised that people with a disability should be entitled to the same legislative support as women and people from ethnic minorities against discrimination, and what will be done to encourage employers to implement such legislation. Would you vote for a disability rights bill?
Right, so Alf Morris.
I'm glad that our previous discussion ended on the subject of rights, the rights of people. There's been a great deal of talk about anti-discrimination legislation. My bill that was talked out on the 31st of January was a civil rights bill. I thought it was more important to talk in terms of the positive, what we were for, namely full civil rights for people with disabilities. That's why I call my bill the Civil Rights Disabled Persons Bill. Again, I think we're following other countries here. America has legislation, the Americans with Disabilities Act, which asserts the full citizenship of people who are disabled. It accepts that they must have social equality. Other countries have that legislation. Our government has said that they can't take that path. Nicholas Scott in the House of Commons and outside said that he was benevolently neutral. But Robert Jackson, his ministerial colleague, speaking just before the budget at question time on the 10th of March, said, I am opposed to legislating, and so is the government opposed to legislating. Now, there was a dichotomy there. Here, an employment minister was saying that the government is opposed. We'd heard previously that they were benevolently neutral. I think it is most important that this country should stop following other countries. We have a commitment to legislate in the way that you would wish. But I was anticipating that election commitment, trying to fulfill an election manifesto, commitment as it were, before the election. As I say, the bill was talked out by a Conservative Member of Parliament, who later apologised to the House of Commons on the 5th of February. But I do know that disabled people, not least people who are deaf, and I honour the BDA and Deaf Accord for the leadership that they gave. It was most impressive and moving that on our lobby of Parliament on the 21st of January, there were so many deaf people present.
Okay. Sorry, before Nicholas Scott responds, now, Nicol Stephen, what's your response to the question?
Well, we would certainly be in favour of anti-discrimination legislation, but I think you've got to understand where our commitment to this comes from. We believe in a Bill of Rights for everyone in this country, not just for disabled people, not just for women, not just for those from ethnic minorities. We believe that our rights as citizens should be enshrined, should be entrenched. And it's no coincidence that, that Britain has been found guilty so many times on so many different issues in front of the European Court of Human Rights. So yes, we'd be in favour of a Bill of Rights, but it wouldn't only be talking about the needs of the disabled. It would talk about a whole range of issues. But clearly one of the most important areas would be anti-discrimination legislation in relation to the disabled. And can I say that we all know examples, day in, day out, week in, week out, where the disabled, where those with hearing disabilities are discriminated against, whether it be in their jobs or in other areas. And is it enough to say, well, we should educate society, things will change in the longer term? I say no, it isn't good enough. We've got to change now, because the suffering and the misery that it causes, the depression it causes to many disabled, many with deafness, hard of hearing, that has got to be addressed here and now. We can't go on saying it will improve tomorrow.
Right, now over to you for the final point, Nicholas Scott.
Yes, I'll take that on. I have to say that I believe that those who imagine that simply by passing an Act of Parliament you transform people's attitudes and behaviour overnight is a fallacy. I don't know when Alf was last in the United States of America, but I was in California not long ago, and the cynicism there about the Americans with Disability Act and its impact there. They saw it as an act that had been introduced with no federal resources to implement it, as a potential bean feast for lawyers, but precious little to offer for disabled people in the United States of America. I believe we will make further progress. I'm not hostile to legislation. I am benevolently neutral. I'm prepared to look at the arguments. But I do think much more important than passing laws is transforming people's attitudes towards people with disabilities in our society. We are moving in that direction. Employers are changing their attitudes. Educators, bureaucrats, politicians are changing their attitudes. Alf knows that. He's seen it in the House of Commons. He's played a major part in transforming those attitudes, as has Jack Ashley and other leading members on the Labour side of the House of Commons. But so's Peter Thurnham and John Hannam on our side of the House. I believe that good example, harrying, persuading, cajoling people to change their attitudes and realizing it's in their own enlightened self-interest to change attitudes in this country towards disability are likely to be much more important and much more significant on the quality of life of disabled people than any piece of legislation.
Right, thank you. Okay, I'm afraid that's where I have to stop our discussion. First of all, thanks to Nicholas Scott, Alf Morris and Nicol Stephen, and also to our studio audience. Hopefully our discussion will have helped you to decide where to place your vote on Thursday. Don't forget, polling stations will be open between 8 a.m. and 10 p.m. Well, that's all from See Here this week. When we next see you, we'll have a new government. Bye.